Good morning, everyone. I think it's still morning yet, not quite noon. We have about a minute to go, but I am giddy as can be because this is a topic that I love, geology, and so we have an opportunity to learn a little bit about the glaciated history. You know what? I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just calm down. Not everybody's here yet. They're just starting to pile in. We've got over 100 registered, so it should be some great attendance here. For those that are on, just a reminder, you should be able to see and hear us, but we cannot see or hear you. So the way that you can engage with us is through the questions tab, and feel free to ask questions at any time, but we'll surmise at the end with some different ones for Phil, unless there's an opportunity to jump in. But I think for the most part, we'll save them till the end. And I still don't have noon quite yet. And there's noon. So welcome everyone. Jeff Jensen, Director of Community Programs here with Trees Forever. Really pleased that you could be with us today. I am really giddy because this is a fantastic topic and we have one of the best presenters that I'm aware of as far as the topic. Phil Kerr is with us from the Iowa Geological Society. Survey. Thank you. Yeah. Get it right, Jeff. IGS. And he is going to be talking to us about Iowa's glaciated history. But first, want to welcome everyone. Just a reminder, you should be able to see and hear us, but we cannot see or hear you. So the way that you can engage with us is through the questions tab. Want to remind you of our landing page on our Trees Forever website. So this is the treesforever.org/stewards. And so this is where you're going to be able to find information on our additional webinars coming up here and our field days, and more on that in just a minute. And don't forget about our Facebook group. Be sure to join the Facebook group if you haven't already. Feel free to post and comment. Bree Hull does a great job keeping that up to date and getting information out to everyone. We are going to be out and about in July, tomorrow, in fact. Getting ahead of myself, here's our agenda for today. We're going to talk about some webinars, some field days, and then get right into it. So on your map, your calendars, be sure you have these dates listed. These are our webinars here. More information can be found on the Trees Forever landing page, the Stewards landing page on the Trees Forever website. We have some interesting field days coming up starting tomorrow. So if you want to check out and do some butterfly tagging in Cass County, the place to be is with Brad Riphagen, the man, the myth, the legend, and he is going to be at their outdoor educational classroom near Messina. Information is on our Trees Forever calendar. On Monday, July 21st in Alameda County, mushroom hike and native plant ID at Yellow Forest State Park. So join Bree. She's going to be, along with the staff from the County Conservation Board, doing the mushroom hike. That'll be fun. And then we have Cerro Gordo. So join myself and Ryan Wilkie. We're going to meet the roadside manager there, Lime Creek Nature Center, see some fantastic roadsides, maybe even play a little prairie bingo. And then Marshall County on Tuesday, July 29th, roadsides at work at the Grimes Farm and Conservation Center. So some great chances to be out and about and learning more about native landscapes and the importance that they provide. Again, here is our landing page on our Trees Forever website. And without further ado, oh yeah, reminder, again, you should be able to see and hear us, but if not, questions, put them in the questions tab there. I'll be monitoring that throughout. But of course, I'm not an expert, so I'll just basically be curating questions for Phil, and then he'll take them at the end here. With that, Phil Kerr, geologist, Iowa Geological Survey. Take it away, Phil.
All right, I will take it away with the screen at least. So thank you for coming by on this lovely Wednesday. So my name is Phil Kerr. I work for the Iowa Geological Survey again, and you don't need to see my notes, so let's not do that. And what I'm going to present to you today is part of Iowa's glacial history, but I really want to get the point across that Iowa is entirely glaciated. So being a scientist, one of the things that really gets my goat is when things are wrong and especially when things are wrong about the state that I work in and grew up in. And not knocking anything that wasn't glaciated, but Iowa has some of the best quaternary deposits in the world, and we should recognize it, and we should appreciate the fact that ice has covered the entire state at one time or another. So without further ado, let's get into it. So one of the things that I wonder about is North America and how it's changed over the last 2.5 million years of the Quaternary. And here we can see a map of the glacial margins. And so the red line is the extent of glaciation during the Quaternary. And this covers everything, all of the different glaciations combined. This is as far as the ice got, except for this one little spot right there. So the big question is, why is that? Why did that happen? And what's the evidence for that? Yeah, we're gonna look at that in depth towards the end here. So here's a map though of the different glacial advances into Iowa, and so this is a map showing that the Des Moines Lobe is in the center of the state, and there were also some earlier advances during the late Wisconsin, right before that in the middle Wisconsin. So the Des Moines Lobe and the ice sheet was pretty active during the last glacial maximum, which is about 28 to 15, 16,000 years ago. But in Iowa, there's actually ice deposits right before that, which is uncommon because they're not found in any other state in the region. So it's pretty interesting. And Iowa also has evidence for ice advance during the Illinoisan, which was the last glacial cycle, and those deposits came in, or that ice came in from the east through Illinois, thus the name. It's pretty wild how creative geologists are. So one of the things we need to get over, and I need to get across, is drift. And so the term driftless really doesnn't mean what people think it is. So drift was brought about by Charles Lyell. People might know him, he's a big name, but Lyell might have been a liar. No, just a bad interpretation of what some sediments look like. So Lyell thought glacial sediments, when he found them, he thought that these were deposited by ice rafted debris or marine sediment or some kind of process where ice carried sediment and deposited it into water, hence drift. But that's not true because they were actually deposited underneath an ice sheet. So not quite underwater, but deposited by frozen water. So I'd say I'd give him like a C in this evaluation. But the term drift doesn't really mean glacial sediments. So that's why I'm not going to use it for this presentation. I'm going to use the term till. And here's the reason why you should believe me, because I've been mapping in Iowa for about a decade now, and that's my main job. Some of you on here might have made some maps yourself, so you know how exciting it is, especially mapping on that Des Moines Lobe. And here's a map of Storm Lake that I made a few years ago. And this is funded by the USGS. So if you like maps, support funding for sciences in the United States. It's pretty critical that we continue understanding the world we live on. And also, I'm the early career researcher for the LUS working group for INQUA, so I know Aeolian sediments as well. Speaking of Des Moines Lobe, here's a little preview for some of the baddies, some of the real ones out there. It's a map that it's a draft of the map I'm working on as part of the potential map or quaternary map of Iowa. And I just thought I'd put that out there so some people could see it. This is a reconstruction of the Des Moines Lobe based on glacial margins and timing. And what it shows is that the Des Moines Lobe has a bunch of different advances and readvances, and they're pretty subtle. And this was mapped using Iowa's 1 meter LiDAR. And I've been such a lucky, blessed little baby boy because I've never not known that. And it really makes a difference when you can see the landscape in such high resolution. And the files are pretty big, but you know what? Computers are good, so we can handle that. Anyway, this isn't the topic, so let's get out of here. But it is part of the glacial land systems of the region. And these are really important because they can tell us about the behavior of ice, what ice was doing, how it interacted with sediments, and vice versa, how the sediments interact with the ice. So we have different regimes where we have like the Des Moines Lobe region, where ice advanced and re-advanced, and it was the end of an ice stream. So the landforms look very different than like they do on the Green Bay Lobe. In eastern Wisconsin, ice came out of the Great Lakes region, and these lobes were massive, and they just hung out. And so the landforms left behind are going to look very different because it was a different style of glaciation. But the Brainerd Lobe is kind of in between. It's kind of an oddball. Minnesota's got their work cut out for them because there's so many different advances, especially Minnesota is almost entirely covered by advances during the late Wisconsin, whereas Iowa only has the one major advance in the center of the state. So going on about why you should believe me, I've made quite a few maps, and here's where they're located. So I've mapped in north central Iowa, east central Iowa, and then right on the Mississippi. So I'm currently mapping in Muscatine County, and it's a fascinating story about glacial advances, river blockages, river reorientation. It's a whole, it's great. And then I've also created maps on the glacial margin on the west side of the state. So the Storm Lake and then Black Hawk Lake, which are two very interesting areas as well. And one thing that we see across the state is till. So unlike other areas, till in Iowa is gray. It's clay rich, and you can't really tell it apart in the field. And this is what Lyle was referring to when he said drift, because you have this fine sediment with these larger clasts in it. And that could potentially be feasible if you have an iceberg. However, Iowa is pretty, it has topography, and like it's really hard to get the ocean up, like 600, 700, 800, 900 feet, depending on where you're on the state. In northwest Iowa, you know, the elevations there are 1,300 feet. So there's just not enough water in the ocean to really get it out, but there is enough water in the ocean to produce massive ice sheets that can carry sediment down from Canada and Minnesota. And that sediment is across the Midwest. And what we see in this region is a whole lot of glacial sediments. And these are really extensive, especially on the Prairie Coteau, which is a region of thick tills that extends from South Dakota through Minnesota into northwestern Iowa. And their tills can exceed 300 to 400 feet in some regions. Whereas in Michigan, that thick deposit is actually glacial fluvial sediment. So water that washed out some of these glacial materials and left basically a giant pile of sand and gravel in the middle of the state. However, there is one little area in the middle of all of this that has very little to no quaternary materials on it. And that's what people refer to as the driftless region. And it's pretty problematic because people really don't have a very defined definition at the moment or previously of what this driftless area shape actually is. So here's a quick survey from Google Images showing people's different interpretation of the driftless region. And one of them in the middle here, the driftless region, the driftless area put out by Trout Unlimited, extends all the way to the Des Moines Lobe across areas where I've mapped. And I can tell you firsthand that there is till there. So it's not driftless. And as we've been over, drift doesn't mean, or drift is glacial sediment, allegedly, or apparently. And there's till all in these areas in Iowa and Minnesota. So it's these, and even the shapes are different. So it's this amorphous thing, and I would call it more of a cultural region than an actual geological one in some people's minds. So let's get into the actual study of glaciation though, and we'll start out with part one, which is just basically talking about the Laurentide ice sheet, which I think we should consider as a moving, melting mountain range. So this is a figure I made based on Lascelles' reconstruction of the thickness of ice. And this is based on a lot of factors. For instance, how much water is missing from the ocean, how much crust is rebounding now due to the weight of the glacier. And the reconstruction puts the elevation at ice at around, 11,500 feet at the height of the domes. And think about that. That's a solid wall of ice. Unlike the Rockies, where you have these peaks, this would have been one massive, continuous ice range, and the size is incomprehensible. And it was so thick and so heavy that it actually depressed the crust. So here's a reconstruction from Osterman et al. And you can see on the right here that in some areas, Canada was depressed potentially over 500 meters, about 1,600 feet. And there's areas of Canada are still rising. In some areas, maybe half an inch a year, which is smoking in terms of geologic time. You won't notice it given the year-to-year transition between or the annual change, but it does have consequences over hundreds to thousands of years. And that this ice sheet extended all the way across Canada and coalesced with the Cordilleran ice sheet during the last glacial maximum. And on the left here, we can see where the ice was streaming. And one of the important areas that streamed into was Iowa. And so the Des Moines Lobe is potentially one of the longest ice streams of the Laurentide ice sheet. So this ice sheet had multiple domes. They're called the Keewatin, Labrador, Quebec, interchangeably. The Fox is to the north. And one of the things that the Laurentide did was it was huge. The volume of it was around 26 million cubic kilometers. And the amount of water that took out was huge. So in terms of ocean level, the Laurentide ice sheet is equivalent to about 3/4 of the total volume of the ocean change. And so it's probably about 80 to 90 meters of sea level change. So all of that was stored on land as ice. And let's do a little comparison in terms of of size, because what is 23,500 or 23 million cubic kilometers actually mean? Well, it's about 2.56 billion blue whales. Of course it is. That can you imagine so many blue whales? It would be. Can you imagine the smell? Oh, another way to put it, though, in terms of the Rocky Mountains and mountains above sea level in North America when the ice was there, the Western Mountains, they're about 7 million cubic kilometers above sea level. So that's about 7 times less, or it's 4 times less than the volume of ice. So to just put it frankly, or to put it bluntly, there's 4 times more ice than mountains above sea level during the Laurentide ice sheet's maximum volume, and it's equivalent to about 2% of the ocean's water, which is insane. Anyway, so we need to take a little break here because that's too much. I'm a bit overwhelmed. I need to really refresh. Look at these cute puppies and the cheetah and the puppy. Oh my goodness, what are they? Are they lifetime friends here? Look at them. They grew up together. That's so cute. It's so cute. Okay, we're back. I just needed to cool off for a second. Thank you for bearing with me there. So I keep using this word quaternary. And what is that? Well, it's something geologists refer to as the last 2.5 million years. It's an old term, and it's actually one of the last original terms to describe sediments. So it's quaternary, which is quad, 4, but we're not going to get into that long-term history. But anyway, basically it refers to multiple glacial and interglacial intervals, and it's roughly equivalent with the onset of North American glaciation. But what it's not equivalent to is a word that's commonly used, and a phrase that's commonly used, and that's ice age. Ice age doesn't really have a meaning because it is when ice sheets were at their maximum extent. Well, what about the time before that? Does it encompass all of them? Well, then are there ice ages? That's why we don't use that term, because it has that colloquial definition that doesn't really, that's not really accurate. So how do we know that there was ice in Iowa? Well, there's 2 different ways. The first one is what we talked about before, is sediments. Glaciers leave very unique deposits, and those can be coarse sands and gravels or clay-rich diamictons, and that's a mixture of clay particles all the way up to boulders. And the less obvious features are landforms in some regions. These landforms can only be caused under or due to advancing and retreating ice. So here's a shot, or here's a picture on the right here of glacial features on the Iowa-Minnesota border. And this landscape is really flat. And it's really hard to see these on the landscape, but using aerial imagery and remote sensing like LiDAR, you can really pick them out and have a good idea of what's going on under the ice as ice is advancing and retreating. So here's a zoomed in shot of that same area, and you can see the contact between class supported sands and gravels. So that would be glacial fluvial deposits made by sediment laden water melting from the ice sheet, and then glacial diamicton from the same body of ice as it ran over that sediment previously deposited. And that's a pretty flat contact there. So this is outside of Alden, Iowa. And one of the best ways to find out where I stopped was to find moraines. So shout out to Jeff, living near the Algona moraine here. And this is one of the biggest moraines in Iowa. And it's close to the Minnesota border, and it represents a re-advance of the Des Moines Lobe. So these indicate where I paused and stopped. So do we have those for all the different advances in Iowa? Well, sadly, we only really identify glacial moraines for the last two, the late Wisconsin and the Illinoisan. So the Illinois advance, you can see the moraine in Louisa and Des Moines counties and parts of Lee, but all the other older advances, there's not really good indications. So we're not going to draw on those just yet. We need to talk about the most recent advance because of uniformitarianism. If we understand how ice advanced into Iowa during the last ice advance, then maybe we can use that to better understand the previous iterations of the ice sheet. So we're going to talk about the Des Moines Lobe, which is pretty interesting. So the Des Moines Lobe starts all the way up in Canada, and it'll pop up here in a second. So that black arrow points to where I am. Boy, howdy, outside of that region. But here's what the area or here's what Canada looks like. And this topography is shaped by Quaternary ice. It's pretty wild how much sediment has been scraped off during this interval. And the Des Moines Lobe started in Manitoba and streamed all the way down into Iowa, roughly along that path, but it took a few turns. But I don't want to get a hitch in the giddy up just yet. So one of the things that we try to figure out is the Des Moines Lobe typical for ice advance, or is it an oddball? And the other question is, when? Is it an oddball during the last glacial advance, or is it an oddball in relation to the older glacial advances? So here we see the extent of that in that figure that you previously saw. And you can't really see good indications of the older margins, especially the middle Wisconsin. And the pre-Illinoisan are all without really obvious moraines. So getting into the Des Moines Lobe in more detail though, as I previously said, it's the end of an ice stream starting in Manitoba, and it advanced into Iowa relatively late. So it reached Des Moines at around 15.8 thousand years ago based on radiocarbon ages. Recently were recalibrated using IntCal 4 and the new calibration curves. Anyway, so this ice sheet advanced and stagnated again and again, and it gave us this interesting topography and where we can map that out and see how this ice stream really behaved. But again, that's not the point of this talk exactly. One of the things I want to get, I want to correct just for you all experts, is, and oftentimes in reconstructions, the Des Moines Lobe is misshapen. And I tracked that down, and it's based on 2 radiocarbon ages collected in the 60s. So you can see, if you zoom in, it's kind of a wider than you see in the figures that I've put out. And what's going on with that? So here's I think something from the Kansas survey. So this red line on this map here shows that extent, and that this advance was due to a publication put out in the 80s, and it basically says that Wisconsin advance is that wide, but that's not true. It's a late Wisconsin advance. That's the glacial maximum. As I referred to earlier, the earlier middle Wisconsin advances went out that far, so it's not accurate to draw the Des Moines Lobe that wide, because that's not the shape of the ice during the last glacial maximum. And so you can see on the left here, this is the origin of that lobe shape, and then on the right is the correction using the newly collected radiocarbon ages from on and off the lobe, showing that the extent of that wider glacial margin is actually an older glacial advance. So in the section, though, we can actually make the distinction between that recent advance and the older ones. This is from the Alden Quarry, the Martin Marietta property, and we have various radiocarbon ages indicating when ice advanced. So the thought is, if you have a chunk of wood near the base of the till, that's from a tree that was basically plowed over and carried maybe a short distance, and you can get the radiocarbon age, and that will determine when ice advanced. So in between the recent glaciation, there's actually a zone of loess, and we have ages from snail shells in there too, showing that there's a distinct break in glaciation between the Des Moines Lobe and the older advances, the part of the Fort Dodge and Lehigh till or phases here. So we need to get rid of that red line and just really tighten up the glacial boundary here. So just remove that and use the GIS coverages that the Iowa Geological Survey puts out. But you might ask yourself, what is the Des Moines Lobe like in relation to other lobes? Because there's a bunch of them across the region. Well, it's actually an oddball. So in terms of timing, the Des Moines Lobe is very late, but also the early advances are before the other ice, or before ice came into the other regions. So there's something going on, and what it probably is related to is the source of the ice. So the Des Moines Lobe comes out of central Canada, the Keewatin Dome, whereas the glacial lobes that come out of the Great Lakes are sourced from another area. So there might be a difference in precipitation, sources, and all these different interactions. So the Des Moines Lobe is an oddball in terms of the modern configuration of the Laurentide. So once again, here's that glacial margin, the Des Moines Lobe on there, and all the other ones to the east, those are the ones that are kind of out of phase with the Des Moines Lobe potentially. And because the Des Moines Lobe advanced so late, it was really warm. So it was about 15,000 years ago when it reached its terminus, and it was very hot. So ice extended into Iowa very rapidly, and then was subject to pretty warm temperatures. So the result, or what that would result in, is a bunch of superficial melting. So these are examples of superglacial lakes from Greenland, and then those develop different superglacial drainage networks. So rivers and channels and sinkholes would develop on top of the ice. Sinkholes or moulins, which get ice to the bottom of the glacier. So this is important because we see landforms that relate to that. And the amount of water that a melting ice sheet would have that's about 100 miles wide would be unfathomable. And the result that we see on the landscape is tunnel valleys. So once you put water to the base of the ice sheet, that's then pressurized. And here's some tunnel valleys that are in the Altamont advances. So this is a little bit to the west of Boone, northwest of Boone. And these moraines have streams cutting through them, but those streams were from pressurized water under the ice sheet. So those punched through the moraines. In other areas of Iowa, these aren't common. And so these tunnel valleys indicate what's going on with the superglacial drainage network and the relationship it has with the subglacial. So looking at all of across the Des Moines Lobe, we can get a handle on what's going on. The resulting landscape, though, of this fast, wet, moving ice sheet is it's flat and it's really full of moraines. And another thing that this ice sheet did too was it also reorganized drainage networks. Because think about it, you have an ice sheet that an ice advance that's anywhere from 100 to 500 to maybe even a kilometer meters high to potentially even a kilometer in some areas. Water is going to come out of that, and rivers aren't going to really matter because they get buried as ice advances. So here's potentially a potential reconstruction of the orientation of rivers before the advance of the Des Moines Lobe and the blocking of the Mississippi River that was about 24,000 years ago. So when ice advanced and reached its maximum, that's not how ice moved in, obviously, but ice didn't come into the air or into Iowa until late. But in Illinois, ice was, or the Lake Michigan Lobe was present and blocked the Mississippi River. It used to flow through Peoria down to St. Louis, but ice blocked it, formed Glacial Lake Milan and Glacial Lake Wisconsin, and then reorganized the Mississippi Basin. The advance of the Des Moines Lobe then blocked the Iowa and the Cedar and reorganized the Des Moines rivers, giving us the modern configuration. Before that, the Des Moines didn't flow as far north. It was likely the Cedar or the Iowa that extended up into Minnesota. So ice comes in, it can reorganize rivers, it deposits materials. So let's consider some of the older deposits now that we have this framework. So we're going to try to get in with the old, but part of that means we have to address some of the lingering nomenclature that existed since the late 18th or late 19th century. And that's these classical names. So you have the Kansan, Nebraskan, Iowa, or Illinoisan, and Wisconsin advances. There is an Iowan too, but that's always been a subject of controversy. And early geologists in the area used the relative position of till sheets outside of the Wisconsin boundary and Illinois boundary to say, well, sometimes you see two till sheets, and that must mean there was two advances beyond the Wisconsin margin, because those moraines are very obvious. They had that very early in the bag. T.C. Chamberlain really sussed those out, and this is important to address because there's areas where they're still using this. So this is the Encyclopedia Britannica website, and you can see that they still really use it, but that's not accurate. And one of the reasons that geologists figured this out was due to what's called the pearlite ash. So in between some of these tills, there was an ash layer, and this ash was from volcanic eruptions from Yellowstone, and those ash particles blew out onto the landscape and fell in across the region, but were preserved in topographic lows. You're not going to keep ash around after a couple centuries of rainfall unless there's depressions that the ash can accumulate in. Elsewise, it's just washed away, similar to a dust storm. So looking at these ashes, geologists in the 70s actually said, wait a second, that one pearlite ash is actually three separate ashes, meaning that there's actually multiple tills in between these layers. And so the classic Kansan and Nebraskan were busted apart. And then we had to reconsider what's going on. And eventually geologists said, well, we actually can't identify distinct dimictons, so we'll just call them all pre-Illinoisan because they're before the Illinoisan. And so this nomenclature has persisted. There's your ash layers in those deposits from the three eruptions in Yellowstone, and they're in between these pre-Illinoisan tills. And another thing about these pre-Illinoisan tills is you can actually look at their magnetic properties, and you can see if the tills have normal or reverse polarity. And if they have reverse polarity, they have to be before about 75 or 750 or 775,000 years ago when the Bruns-Matiyama reversal occurred. So in Iowa, we have some of those tills that have reverse polarity. And this is what people look for, or this is the nomenclature across the region. And it doesn't really line up. It's really hard to correlate because these sediments all look the same in the field. You have to really get in you have to really do laboratory analysis to parse them out. And one of the changes that you see across this package is that the clay percentages change as you go from the older package to the newer package. And we know there has to be older glacial advances because of deep sea sediment records. So ice affects the ocean by storing water. So that changes the isotopic values, removing the lighter elements and concentrating the heavier oxygen isotopes. And then organisms reflect that in their shells once they die and sink to the bottom of the ocean. Those stack, and we can get a benthic record of the concentration of oceans, which then can be applied to measure or to indicate when glaciers were potentially there. So this benthic record shows, yes, there's definitely late, or there's definitely Wisconsin glacial advance and an Illinoisan due to the concentration, but wait, there's multiple ones before that. In fact, there's so many more before that. And I just have to say that, you know, if we think about this in terms of time, the pre-Illinoisan is about 95% of the Quaternary. So understanding how these different older ice sheets and tills or the different configurations of the ice sheets advanced and where they went will help us understand how we got to our present landscape. However, it's really difficult, as I've said before. But Iowa does hold the key to them because we have all of these glacial tills at the surface, not buried by late or by late Wisconsin or Illinoisan glaciation. And so here's a set of tills right outside of Iowa City that allegedly has normal and reverse polarity tills. So if we look back at this map, we can see Iowa is actually covered with pre-Illinoisan tills. And if you are at any one spot, you could be on a different till if you move a couple miles away. It's really difficult to suss those out. So with all of this in mind, though, let's get at the problem at hand. We're going to talk about those. I don't want to break anyone's heart, but it is time to end the Iowan driftlessness. So we're going to get in, we're going to talk about why this is incorrect and some evidence for that. And one of the things that people point out is, oh, you know, look, there's no glacial sediment in this region. It's driftless, and that's not true. And we've known that actually for the last century, since 1922. Work by people or work by geologists in the region showed that there actually was patches of upland till, they called it drift in the time, but these extended all the way to the Mississippi River. So how can you call something driftless when there's drift there? So it's not really sound logic. So this is from Trowbridge's publication, Drift in the Driftless, which really sums up what is actually there. So these reconstructions here, where you have, you know, ice, or the driftless region encompasses all these areas west of the Mississippi, they're incorrect because there actually is glacial till there. So part of this bothered some geologists in the area, especially Eric Carson at the Wisconsin survey. And so he led an effort between the 4 states affected by this problem, and this led to a publication. So this is there's a new map of the driftless area, and it actually doesn't include Iowa, which is I agree with, and I hope I should, because I drew the western portion or western line of this figure. And so the driftless style topography is in Iowa. So it has the same incised valley, the same kind of je ne sais quoi that the east side of the river does, but it's not due to lack of glaciation. While it wasn't glaciated recently, it was at some time during the Quaternary. So it's not driftless. Just repeat after me. Iowa was entirely glaciated. Northeast Iowa is not the driftless region, though it does have driftless region like topography. So this is my one thing. I just please agree with me here. So if we look at the topography though, you can see that the glaciated and unglaciated region in the driftless and driftless-like topography look relatively the same. And that's because the topography is formed by the same process, and that's fluvial incision. So the rivers in Northeast Iowa and the rivers in Wisconsin behave similarly. They go right to the Mississippi. And what does that matter? Well, it has to do with energy and the streams themselves downcut. And here is a graph showing the long profiles of the rivers in Northeast Iowa going down from the root to the upper Iowa, and then the Maquoketa and the Wapsipinicon to the Cedar. And so the Wapsipinicon and Cedar are not in the driftless region. And you can see how that affects their long profile because they're flatter, they have less energy, and they also go through areas of thick glacial till. Whereas the upper Iowa and the root, they start at roughly the same elevation, but have a much shorter course, so they have more energy to incise down into. Rivers really want to be flat, so they're going to carve down until they get to base level, which is the ocean. But that doesn't happen overnight. And so the area in Northeast Iowa is starting to get there during the Quaternary, because that's when this system was set up. And it was set up by glaciers, actually, because early Pleistocene glaciers advanced into the area and set up the drainage network. We've seen how the Des Moines Lobe reorganizes rivers. The Mississippi has been diverted recently by ice sheets as well. So this area on the west of the Mississippi, well, it's not that the west of the Mississippi is glaciated, it's the other way around. The Mississippi River is in place due to glaciation. So that changes the framework of how we should think about this. It's not based on lack of ice, it's based on where ice stopped. And so after that, it set rivers in place, and they've been incising through the Quaternary. And the reason that they can incise so significantly is actually due to glaciation too, because it raises and lowers sea level. So you get this change in base level, which has an action to increase incision into the region due to the Mississippi going up and down, because the Gulf of Mexico went up and down as well. So all of these combine to make this unique topography, but it's based on fluvial incision, not lack of sediments. So you do that for, a million years, 1.5 million, and you'll get some gullies. I mean, the Cites Vachel in the Grand Canyon actually isn't that old either. I don't know if it's equivalent to this, but it's not like 100 million years old. It's relatively recent, geologically speaking. So hopefully you can go out and tell people now that all of Iowa was glaciated, and that while the driftless region of Iowa sounds nice, it's inaccurate. So yeah, go ahead and use it, but just know deep in your hearts, deep in your souls, that it was glaciated and that there's till there. And only southeast Wisconsin was truly unglaciated, or southwest Wisconsin. And this is based on work by Eric Carson of the Wisconsin survey, who's been mapping up there extensively. and every core hole he's bored with various apparatus or apparati. He's never found till or even a chert lag. So if you would expect there to be something on these narrow divides, chert would persist because it wouldn't chemically weather. So Iowa, again, covered by ice. And it's I don't know why we'd feel bad about that. The Quaternary glaciation is fascinating. Iowa has the best record on Earth, so like we should be proud of it. Anyway, that's what I have for this presentation. So if you have any questions, I'd love to address them if they're in the chat here. Oh. All right, let's see if we can get there. Or Jeff, do you want to read some out and I'll try to answer them?
Phil, let's go that way. Give me just a second here. I guess right off the bat, can you define till for us? When you reference till, what are you talking about? What does that mean?
So till is what drift the term actually is. It's glacial sediment deposited usually under the ice sheet, and till is a glacial diamicton, and a diamicton is a sediment that has clay particles all the way up to boulders. So if you go out in Iowa and you hit blue clay that has gravels in it, that's glacial till. That's the sediment that drift is supposed to be.
Next question. I think I heard the term, and you just wrapped it up here in Wisconsin. Didn't find any till and didn't find any chert.
Chert, yes. So chert is quartz, and it's really chemically inert. And another thing too is they haven't found outwash in the valleys as well. So if you have an ice sheet in an area, it melts and it produces a lot of sands and gravels. And those sands and gravels can persist for long periods of time if they're in a stable landscape position. And they don't find those either.
Interesting.
And as much as I want there to be ice everywhere, I have to admit that there wasn't.
So a question here is, just in general, any good books that you would recommend on Iowa's geology?
There is a book, I think, called Iowa, or the Geology of Iowa. It's by Wayne Anderson. So that's a good book to go through the entire Phanerozoic package.
Question about where did the LIDAR data come from?
Oh boy, the LIDAR data came from planes, and that Iowa's been flown twice. Once in the last like 5-6 years, and then the time before that was in the late noughties into the early 2010s. And the LIDAR was paid for by the federal government and the Iowa DNR. And oh yeah, it's just fascinating stuff. So if you have the ability, just stare at some of it. But yeah, it's such a great data set, and we're so lucky to have not only one, but 2 sets of it, so we can do comparisons about how landscapes change over the last 10 years.
Here's a question from Shane. Is there much isostatic rebound in Iowa?
Oh, yes. So isostatic rebound is a big deal in Canada, and
what is it?
But in Iowa, we're beyond that margin, and there's only a couple meters. We're not rising up, we're actually potentially sinking down, because that zero edge might be somewhere in Iowa, because once you push something down in front of it, it bows up. And so depending on where ice was at what time, that affects the state. But I don't think it really affects the drainages too much because of silt. Iowa's covered with loess, and that has way more of a control on where rivers and streams are in their valleys than isostatic rebound.
Going back to LIDAR, any other states completed LIDAR maps that you know of?
Oh yeah, I'd say most other states have complete coverage, but it's, again, really intensive. They're really big files. So sure. If you want to make a assemblage of the entire lower 48, it'd be, terabytes in size.
Sure. This is referencing one of the pictures that you had with the polarity Could you, maybe what is the polarity swap that happened roughly 75,000 years ago?
Yeah, so every once in a while the mantle gets kind of frisky and the poles wander as they're doing right now. But during big events, they actually flip. So what is magnetic north is now magnetic south. And the biggest recent change was the Bruns-Matayama. So what that does is subtle or small grains, especially if they're magnetic or affected by magnetic fields, can orient based on if it's normal or reversed. And in tills, there's iron minerals, and then we can detect when they're deposited in the water under the tills, they'll orient a little bit with the poles at that time, and then they'll kind of be locked in as the tills dehydrate.
Fantastic. Want to question, why do we have fields of sand dunes in Northeast Iowa?
Oh, do you want to ask could that person ask be more specific? Because I've mapped every dune in Iowa too.
We'll see if they can chime in there.
But
Question.
the biggest reason is actually because of the advance of the Des Moines Lobe. It put outwash into the Cedar River predominantly, some into the Iowa, but not a lot into the Des Moines. But the Cedar, the basin of the Cedar captured most of the advance of the Des Moines Lobe. And in that valley, the Cedar Valley goes in areas of shallow bedrock and then areas where bedrock is way below the surface. And in those wider areas, the river the banks are pretty low, and wind from the northwest was actually able to pick up sand grains and blow them out of the valley. And the wind was oriented due to the size of the ice sheet. So if you have that giant block of ice sitting in Canada, the jet stream was going to lock onto the front of that and just orient any weather system coming into the area. So I would imagine like derecho level winds would be not yearly, but at least commonplace, more so than they are now.
Interesting. And yes, chimed in here, they are near the Iowa River.
Oh, yes. So. Yep, and so the Iowa River caught meltwater as well. Not as much as the Cedar, but more so than the Des Moines. And so the dunes in the Iowa River aren't as distant because the topography of the Iowa River Valley itself captured the dunes, because the Iowa River actually lines up with that northwest wind direction. So it acted as a chute, and the first time you see dunes is down by Marengo, and then when you go to the Hawkeye Wildlife Area, there's massive dunes down there that some of them are 50 feet high by a mile wide.
Whoa. Okay, we have two final questions. I want to be respectful of your time, Phil. Did the younger Dryas affect the Des Moines Lobe, which you said was one of the youngest North American lobes?
Yeah, the answer is no, absolutely not, because the Des Moines Lobe was melted by the time of the younger Dryas. And the younger Dryas is a kind of misunderstood event in popular culture. What happened was as the Des Moines Lobe melted, it produced a lot of water, and that water was sequestered up ice because the topography was lower, allowing there to be an exacerbated glacial lake. So the draining of Glacial Lake Agassiz just flooded down what is now the Minnesota River Valley into the Mississippi, causing there to be a huge volume of water injected into the Gulf, which caused ocean circulation to really fluctuate.
Question to follow up on the glacial. Did Iowa have any glacial lakes of any notable size?
There are. So most of those lakes now are during the late Wisconsin. Some of those are still around. So you have West Lake Okoboji, Spirit Lake, and then Storm Lake's much smaller, and then Wall Lake. And all of those are actually, I did a recent report on the formation of West Lake Okoboji, and it's super deep, but it has the same genesis of the other lakes, which is catastrophic releases of meltwater from subglacial processes. So you get these deep tunnel valleys due to water sitting under the ice being pressurized and shot out through the snout of the ice. But before that, there was actually an older lake due to the advance of the Illinoisan. It's called Lake Pryor, and that lake filled the Iowa and Cedar Basin as ice advanced through Illinois and blocked the Iowa and Cedar drainages. And we actually have evidence of that recently collected due to some rotosonic cores. And we see a really I've never seen anything like it. It's a layer of clay that is just it's pure silt or silty clay. There's nothing in it. And we see that beneath the Illinoisan ice in Muscatine County or underneath Wisconsin in sands and gravels in the Iowa River Valley. So there are lakes, but the problem with, we're not like Minnesota and Wisconsin because we have these fast lobes that advance quickly, and those don't really carve down into the ice sheet or the sediment like those thicker lobes to the north and northeast.
Okay, folks, we're going to wrap this up, but this is a question I had as well. And so
I could take one or two more questions. I think we're going
to run wild with this one. So what is the most harebrained theory for why that there is a driftless area in Wisconsin? What do you think?
Well, some people attribute that some people think that it's actually glaciated. I would call that the most harebrained one, but there's no evidence for that. It's just an assumption that what was there has been eroded, and that's not really good science. But the ice, the reason I believe the driftless is there, or the way I understand it, is glacial pathways and flow directions. So we have to think about ice sheets in terms of lobes once we're on the southern margin. They're not these massive walls of ice on a continental scale. They actually flow into low spots like rivers do. And the Des Moines Lobe followed a trough all the way from Manitoba into Iowa. And that steered it clear of southwest Wisconsin. Now, the Great Lakes formed during the Quaternary, but those are due to structures in the bedrock, actually. So Lake Superior is the superficial expression of the Mid-Continent Rift. And once ice got into there, it hogged out the softer materials in the center of the rift, and that then steered it clear of southwest Wisconsin from the north, and Lake Michigan steered it to the southwest. So you just kind of split ice around that due to these underlying structures. But one of the other interpretations is that some of the sandstones in Wisconsin drained the base of the ice, and so it caused it to slow down. And I just don't think that's very plausible because, you know, these ice sheets are so big. But if you split them due to flow, due to the topography, I think that is much more sensible.
So just happenstance, really. I mean, just topography led the flow, and this was the high spot. And
I mean, like, it's not special. It's just an area that wasn't glaciated. We tend to put human emotions into landscapes when we try to explain them. Like, why is this area special? Well, it's not special geologically. It's special in terms of your feeling and your connection with it, which is really important, especially for things like conservation. But I'm a geologist, so I can say, hey, I don't have to consider plants and animals too much, so I can be a little more cold-hearted and dissuade a connection with personal stuff like that.
Well, thank you for your humor. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. A lot of folks have asked, hey, is this recorded? Will it be posted? Absolutely. This will be on our YouTube page here shortly. Give us a couple of days to get it processed and posted, but you'll be able to check it out. Really, again, Phil, fantastic. It's always exciting having you on. These topics are amazing, and I'm getting a lot of feedback in the chat saying that as well. So have a great day, everyone. Stay cool. Phil, you take care, and we'll see you all here in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Thank you.